The rain against the window was a frantic, desperate thing, a million tiny fists beating against the glass. Ilara Vance watched the rivulets chase each other down the pane, distorting the bruised purple of the evening sky. For 3 months, she had lived in this small, clean apartment, a place she had tried to make into a sanctuary. It was not a fortress. She was learning the difference now. She did not jump when the sound came. It was not a knock. It was the splintering crack of a door frame giving way, a violation of wood and metal that echoed the deeper violation of her peace. She had known he would come. Marcus Thorne did not accept endings he did not orchestrate. He stood in the ruined doorway, water dripping from the shoulders of his expensive cashmere coat onto her rented floor. His posture was a study in relaxed ownership, the kind of casual arrogance a man assumes in a space he believes is his. He looked around the small living room, his lip curling at the sparse, carefully chosen furniture. It was all she had been able to afford after he had frozen their joint accounts, a legal maneuver executed with the petty precision of a scalpel severing a nerve. "Really, Ilara," he began, his voice a low thrum of condescending disappointment. "This is what you chose? This little box? After everything I gave you?" She remained by the window, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her stillness was a dam holding back a flood of terror. She had spent a decade learning how to be still in his presence, how to make herself small and quiet so as not to set off the tremors of his rage. It was a skill she was trying to unlearn, but muscle memory was a stubborn ghost. "The locks have been changed, Marcus. You are trespassing." Her voice was lower than she intended, a husk of its usual tone. He laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. He stepped further into the room, his expensive shoes leaving wet prints on the pale wood. He was not listening. He was performing. "Trespassing? Darling, everything you have is because of me. This apartment, that ridiculously severe dress you're wearing, the very air you're breathing. It's all downstream from my generosity." He ran a hand over the back of her simple armchair, a gesture that was somehow both a caress and a threat. She watched him, cataloging the micro-expressions she knew so well. The slight flare of his nostrils, the tightening around his eyes. He was building to something. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that would crumble and apologize and beg for him to fix what he had broken. That version of her had died 3 months ago, quietly, without a funeral. "I sold some things," she said, the statement clean and sharp. "Things that were mine." His head snapped toward her. The performance fell away, revealing the raw, ugly machinery of his fury beneath. "Things? What things?" "The jewelry from your mother. The art pieces you bought at that auction you couldn't afford. The Gia." The name of the car landed in the room and detonated. The air grew thick and heavy. The 1968 Carmen Gia, a symphony of silver and chrome, had been his pride. He called it his, a bonus from a grateful client. Ilara knew the truth. It was a placeholder, a temporary custody arrangement with a collector Marcus was trying to impress, a man whose portfolio he desperately needed. It had been left in the garage of the house she had designed, the house he now lived in with someone new. It was a loose end he had forgotten to tie up. "You did what?" His voice was a whisper now, far more dangerous than his shout. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his body radiating a heat that felt like a furnace. He did not rush. He was savoring the moment, the inevitable reassertion of his control. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. The pressure was immense, a prelude to a bruise she could already feel forming. "You had no right. That car was mine. It was worth more than this entire pathetic life you're trying to build." She did not scream. She did not struggle. She looked at his hand on her arm, then back to his face. His eyes were wide with a kind of ecstatic rage. He was enjoying this, not because he cared about the car, but because he believed he had finally found the lever to break her. He believed he was reminding her of her place in his world as an accessory, an asset to be managed. "Let go of my arm, Marcus. You will call the buyer," he hissed, his face close to hers. She could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You will tell them there was a mistake. You will get it back, and then you will come home." "No." The word was small, but it was solid. It was the first stone in a new foundation. His face contorted, the hand connected with her cheek. It was not a slap. It was a strike, a full-fisted blow delivered with the intent to punish, to shatter. The force of it sent her stumbling back, her head cracking against the rain-slicked window pane. Stars exploded behind her eyes, bright and painful. The sound of the impact was a dull, wet thud that seemed to silence the storm outside. For a moment, there was only the ringing in her ears and the coppery taste of blood in her mouth. She slid down the wall, her legs refusing to hold her, and landed in a heap on the floor. Through the swimming haze of pain, she saw him standing over her, his chest heaving. He looked down, not with remorse, but with a kind of clinical satisfaction. He had broken something. That was the goal. He was about to speak, to deliver the final, crushing verdict on her failed attempt at freedom. But the words never came. From the ruined doorway, a voice spoke. It was not loud. It was calm, measured, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "That is enough." Marcus froze, his body tensing like a startled animal. He turned slowly, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. A man stood where the door had been. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light in the room. It was tailored with an almost architectural precision, every line perfect. He was not wet from the rain. An immense man holding a large black umbrella stood just behind him, a silent, unmoving sentinel. The man in the suit was Korean, his features sharp and intelligent, his eyes dark and profoundly still. He held no weapon. He did not need one. His presence was the weapon. He did not look at Marcus. His gaze was fixed on Alara, on the floor, her hand rising to her split lip. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. It was not pity. It was something harder, colder. It was the quiet assessment of a debt being incurred. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus snarled, puffing up his chest. It was a pathetic display, a dog barking at a tiger. "This is a private matter. Get out!" The man in the suit finally shifted his gaze to Marcus. He looked at him the way a geologist might look at a rock sample, with detached analytical curiosity. There was no anger, no threat. There was only a quiet, final judgment. This was the source of his power. It was not performed. It was structural. It was the kind of power that did not need to be announced because it was woven into the fabric of reality. "I am Julian Sterling," he said, his voice steady as iron wrapped in silk. "And you are in my apartment." The statement hung in the air, a perfect, impossible truth. Marcus's bravado faltered. "Your what?" "This is her apartment, my wife's." "She is not your wife," Julian Sterling stated, a simple correction of fact. "And as of 2 hours ago, I own this building. Therefore, you are trespassing in my home, and you have assaulted another of my tenants." He paused, his eyes flicking to Alara again. "My guest." The world tilted on its axis. Alara stared, trying to make sense of the words. He owned the building? The sheer, casual power of it was incomprehensible. Marcus was sputtering, his mind failing to process the sudden, complete loss of his authority. He was a king who had just discovered his kingdom was a cardboard box someone else had just purchased. "Now you will leave," Mr. Sterling continued, his tone unchanged. It was not a request. It was an observation of the immediate future. Marcus, desperate to reclaim the narrative, took a step toward him. "You have no idea who I am. I'll have you—" "You are Marcus Thorne." Sterling interrupted, his voice dropping half an octave, becoming something that felt like the pressure before an earthquake. Founder of Thorn Development, you have leveraged your company to its absolute limit against the forthcoming Obsidian Tower project. Your primary investors are the Kenta Banking Group. Your personal finances are a tangled mess of shell corporations and bad debt. Your credit is a lie. Your success is a fiction your ex-wife designed. I know exactly who you are. Every word was a nail hammered into the coffin of Marcus's arrogance. He stared, his face draining of all color. The relaxed posture, the swagger, it all collapsed inward, leaving a hollow, terrified man in its place. He had been seen. Not just seen, but dissected, analyzed, and dismissed. Sterling gave a nearly imperceptible nod to the large man behind him. The man stepped forward. He moved with a quiet efficiency that was terrifying. There was no wasted motion. He did not grab Marcus. He simply placed a hand the size of a dinner plate on his shoulder. Marcus flinched as if he'd been burned. "Security is on their way," Sterling said, his attention already leaving Marcus, dismissing him as a problem that was now solved. "They will escort you out. If you ever come within 500 feet of this building or of Miss Vance again, the consequences will be structural. For your company and for you." The big man began to guide a numb, unresisting Marcus toward the hallway. As he passed the threshold, Marcus looked back at Ilara, his eyes pleading, confused. He was searching for the woman who would fix this, the woman who would smooth it all over. He did not find her. He found only a stranger with a bleeding lip looking past him, at the man who had just redrawn the map of her world. The door, or what was left of it, was pulled closed. The sound of retreating footsteps faded, and then there was silence. Not the empty, ringing silence of a room post-violence. It was a different kind of silence, the kind that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. It was the silence of a storm that has finally, definitively broken. Julian Sterling stood in the center of her living room. He had not moved. He looked at her, still on the floor, and his expression softened by a fractional degree. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if sensing he might frighten her. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" he asked. Ilara pushed herself up slowly, her body aching. She touched her cheek, her fingers coming away with a smear of blood. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his late 30s. There were no lines of stress on his face, only a profound, almost unnerving composure. He seemed like a man who had never been surprised by anything. "Why?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Why are you here?" "Lena Washington called me," he said simply. "She works for you. She also works for my mother. She is a very observant woman, and a very loyal one." Lena. Of course. Her housekeeper, her friend, the woman who had seen the old bruises and heard the late-night arguments through the walls. Lena, who had watched Marcus's escalating cruelty with quiet, simmering fury. Ilara had given Lena the number of a classic car specialist when she'd decided to sell the Gia. She hadn't thought anything of it. "The car," Ilara whispered, understanding dawning. "The Gia." A hint of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting ghost of an expression. "My father had it commissioned in 1968. He was a man of particular tastes. There are only 2 in the world like it. The other is in a museum in Seoul." He paused. "I was very distressed to learn it had been sold without my knowledge. The man Marcus Thorne borrowed it from was merely its caretaker, not its owner." He took a handkerchief from his breast pocket, a square of pristine white linen. He held it out to her. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cool. She pressed the cloth to her lip, the clean scent of it filling her senses. "Lena told me you were in trouble," he continued, his voice returning to its calm, factual tone. "She said you were a good person in a bad situation. She said you thought the car belonged to him. She was very persuasive." Ilara could picture it. Lena, her hands on her hips, her gaze direct and unblinking, speaking to this powerful, dangerous man as if he were a disobedient schoolboy. Lena did not have different manners for different people. She had one set, direct, honest, and utterly unimpressed by wealth or status. "I'm sorry," Alara said. "About the car. I'll get the money. I can pay you back." He waved a hand, a gesture of dismissal. "The car has been recovered. The money is irrelevant. That is not why I am here." He looked around the room again, his eyes lingering on the broken door frame. "This is not a safe place for you anymore. You will pack a bag. You will come with me." It was not a question. It was a command, delivered with the same quiet finality with which he had dismissed Marcus. Her entire life, men had been telling her what to do. First her father, then her professors, then Marcus. She had just found a sliver of freedom, and now this stranger was trying to take it. The instinct to refuse, to fight, rose up in her. "I can't," she said, her voice stronger now. "I don't even know you." "You know I am the man who just removed Marcus Thorne from your life," he replied, not unkindly. "You know that I am Lena's employer, and you know that you are not safe here. Those are the only facts that matter at this moment." He was right. The terror she had held at bay was beginning to seep back in. Marcus was gone for now, but he was a creature of pride and vengeance. He would not let this go. He would come back, or he would send someone. The law was a slow, clumsy thing. She had tried to get a restraining order. It was just a piece of paper. What Julian Sterling offered was something else entirely. It was a wall. "Where would I go?" she asked, the question a concession. "My family has a small estate just outside the city. It is very quiet, very secure. My mother is there. She is expecting you." His mother! The mention of her was a strategic masterstroke. It reframed the offer, changing it from a powerful man's proposition to a family's gesture of sanctuary. It made it feel safe. She looked at her ruined apartment, at the life she had tried to build, a life that had been shattered in a matter of minutes. She thought about the long nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps in the hall. She thought about the exhaustion, the constant, grinding fear that had become the soundtrack to her days. She met Julian Sterling's gaze. His eyes were patient. He was not rushing her. He was simply waiting for her to arrive at the conclusion he already knew was inevitable. "Okay," she said, the word a quiet surrender, a quiet hope. "Give me 10 minutes." He nodded, a single sharp gesture of assent. "Take your time." He stepped back, moving toward the hallway to give her the illusion of privacy, a small but significant act of courtesy. As she walked into her bedroom, her legs still unsteady, she caught her reflection in the closet mirror. A pale, trembling woman with a darkening bruise on her cheek and blood on her lip. But her eyes were different. The fear was there, yes, but underneath it something new was taking root, a cold, hard clarity. She was not the woman Marcus Thorne had tried to create, and she was about to find out who she really was. The drive out of the city was a blur of rain-streaked lights and silence. Alara sat in the back of a cavernous black sedan that moved through traffic with the serene indifference of a shark gliding through a school of fish. Julian Sterling sat beside her, though a considerable space remained between them. He did not speak. He seemed to be working on a tablet, his fingers moving across the screen with silent, economical speed. The large man who had removed Marcus, whose name she learned was Mr. Park, sat in the passenger seat, a granite statue staring into the wet darkness. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was restful. For the first time in a decade, she was in the presence of a powerful man and did not feel the need to manage his mood, to anticipate his needs, to shrink herself to fit the space he allowed. Julian Sterling seemed to require nothing from her. His entire being was self-contained, a closed system of immense gravity. Her mind replayed the events in her apartment, trying to assemble them into a coherent narrative. It felt like a scene from a film, too dramatic, too sudden to be real. One moment, she was at the mercy of a man she knew all too well, and the next, she was saved by a man she did not know at all. The whiplash was disorienting. She felt a surge of gratitude so profound it was almost painful, followed by a cold spike of fear. She had traded one cage for another, perhaps, a smaller, more brutal cage for a larger, gilded one. She looked at the man beside her. His profile was illuminated by the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. He was handsome, but it was an austere, almost severe beauty. It was the kind of face that belonged on old currency, etched with intelligence and a history she could not begin to guess at. He was, she realized, the most dangerous man she had ever met. And yet she felt safer with him than she had in years. It was a paradox she couldn't yet solve. "My mother will ask you a great many questions," he said suddenly, not looking up from his tablet. "She is insatiably curious about people. You are not obligated to answer any of them." "Is she like you?" Alara asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He finally looked over at her, and the ghost of a smile returned. "No, she is not. She is the part of the universe from which I deviate." The answer was so unexpected, so oddly poetic, that Ilara found herself smiling, a real smile, despite the throbbing pain in her cheek. It was a small, humanizing crack in his armor of perfect composure. They left the city behind, the dense grid of lights giving way to winding roads flanked by dark, dripping trees. Eventually, the car slowed and turned onto a private drive marked by two simple stone pillars. There was no grand gate, no ostentatious display of wealth. It was understated, confident. The drive snaked through a meticulously maintained landscape that felt more like a nature preserve than a garden. The house came into view at the crest of a hill. It was not a mansion. It was a long, low-slung structure of dark wood, glass, and fieldstone that seemed to grow organically from the earth itself. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a perfect fusion of form and function that spoke of peace, privacy, and permanence. It was the kind of house she had always dreamed of designing. Mr. Park opened her door as the car came to a stop under a wide portico. An elderly woman was waiting for them at the entrance. She was small and elegant, dressed in a simple silk tunic and dark trousers. Her hair was a neat silver crown, and her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles that spoke of laughter and deep thought. This had to be his mother. Julian came to stand beside Alara as his mother approached. The old woman's eyes, as dark and intelligent as her son's, swept over Alara, taking in her disheveled state, the bruise, the split lip. There was no shock or alarm in her expression, only a deep, profound sadness, and then a flash of fierce, protective anger. She looked at her son. "You took your time," she said, her voice a gentle, melodic reprimand in Korean. "The traffic was unavoidable, Omoni," he replied in the same language, his tone respectful but with a hint of dry wit. The woman turned her attention back to Alara. She reached out and took Alara's hand. Her fingers were surprisingly strong, her touch warm and firm. "Lena has told me about you," she said, in perfect, lightly accented English. "She said you have a strong heart. I see she was right." She gently touched Alara's cheek, her expression full of a kindness so genuine it made Alara's eyes well up with tears. "Men like that," she said, her voice hardening, "are like weeds. They must be pulled up by the root so they cannot grow again." She then led Alara inside, her hand a steady, grounding presence. The interior of the house was as beautiful as the exterior, a calm, open space of warm wood, natural stone, and vast windows that looked out into the rain-swept darkness. A fire burned in a large, minimalist hearth, casting a warm glow over everything. It was a home, not just a house, but a home. "You will stay here," Mrs. Sterling said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "For as long as you need. This is a house of healing." Over the next few days, Alara began to understand what she meant. The Sterling estate was a world unto itself, a place insulated from the noise and chaos of her former life. She was given a suite of rooms that felt larger than her entire apartment, with a private balcony that overlooked a serene, mist-shrouded lake. Lena was there, arriving the morning after her own arrival, her presence a comforting link to the familiar. She fussed over Alara, bringing her tea and insisting she eat, her cheerful pragmatism a balm on Alara's frayed nerves. "I told you he would handle it," Lena said, plumping a pillow behind Alara's back. "The Sterlings, they don't do things halfway. When they fix a problem, it stays fixed." Alara learned that Julian was rarely at the estate during the day. He left before dawn and returned long after sunset. His business, Sterling Conglomerates, was a vast and complex empire with interests in technology, shipping, and real estate. The whispers she'd once heard about him, the rumors of a darker, more dangerous foundation beneath the legitimate corporate structure, seemed both plausible and entirely irrelevant within the peaceful walls of this house. Here he was simply Julian, the quiet, dutiful son who shared quiet dinners with his mother and their unexpected guest. Those dinners became the focal point of Alara's days. They ate in a small, intimate dining room overlooking the lake. Mrs. Sterling would guide the conversation, drawing stories out of Alara about her childhood, her passion for architecture, the dreams she had before Marcus had systematically dismantled them. She never asked about the abuse directly. She did not need to. She spoke of resilience, of beauty, of the strength it takes to create things in a world that is so often dedicated to tearing them down. She was, Alara realized, actively rebuilding her spirit, one conversation at a time. Julian, for his part, was mostly a quiet observer. He would listen, his dark eyes watching Alara as she spoke. He asked few questions, but when he did, they were always insightful, cutting to the core of the matter. He asked about her design philosophy, about the materials she loved, about the interplay of light and shadow in a space. He was not making small talk. He was gathering data. He was seeing her, not as a victim or a problem to be solved, but as a professional, an artist. One evening, as his mother retired early, they were left alone at the table. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the comfortable silence. "I've been reviewing the preliminary designs for the Obsidian Tower," he said, his voice low. Alara tensed. The Obsidian Tower was Marcus's flagship project, the one he was counting on to make him a legend. It was also her design. Every line, every curve, every innovative use of sustainable material had come from her mind, sketched out in late-night sessions that Marcus had later presented as his own stroke of genius. "He's going to ruin it," she said, the words coming out with a bitterness that surprised her. "His ego is too big. He'll insist on changes, cut corners on the materials, compromise the structural integrity for the sake of a flashier facade. He doesn't understand the balance." "I know," Julian said. He slid his tablet across the polished table. On the screen was a legal document, dense with text. "Thorn Development defaulted on a key bridge loan this morning. My associates at the Kenta Banking Group were disappointed in his lack of foresight. They have transferred the debt and the controlling interest in the project to a new primary stakeholder." Alara stared at the screen. At the bottom of the document, listed as the new stakeholder, was a name she recognized, Sterling Conglomerates. "You bought it," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "You bought the whole project." "It was a sound investment," he said, his expression unreadable. "But it has a design flaw. The lead architect is a fraud." He looked at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I find myself in need of a new one, someone who understands the original vision, someone who knows the balance." The offer was there, unspoken but perfectly clear. He was not giving her a handout. He was not creating a position for her out of pity. He was offering her a chance to reclaim her work, her name, her legacy. He was handing her the keys to the kingdom she had built, which had been stolen from her. She started, her throat tight with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. "Take back what is yours, Miss Vance, and show them all what you can build." For the first time since she had met him, Ilara felt a different kind of tremor in his presence. It was not fear. It was a dizzying, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of possibility. Meanwhile, in the city, Marcus Thorne was discovering the true nature of structural consequences. His world was unraveling, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a series of quiet, devastating clicks. The first click was the call from his contact at Kenta Bank, a man he'd played golf with for years. The man's voice was strained, apologetic. The loan was being called in. There was nothing he could do. The decision had come from the very top, from offshore partners Marcus had never even heard of. The second click was the mass email from his senior project managers, all resigning simultaneously to take positions at a new, well-funded rival firm. A firm, he would later learn, that was a subsidiary of sterling conglomerates. The third and most brutal click was the notice of eviction from his penthouse apartment. The building, it turned out, had been part of a real estate portfolio acquired by Sterling a week ago. The CEO had certain standards for his tenants. He had removed them, mostly. Marcus sat in his cavernously empty office, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a man in freefall, clutching at clouds. He could not comprehend the speed and totality of his ruin. It was like a force of nature, an invisible tsunami that had swept away the foundations of his life while leaving the facade intact for a few moments longer. His rage, once a potent weapon, had curdled into a whining, impotent fear. But underneath the fear, his arrogance remained, a stubborn, toxic weed. This was Ilara's fault. She had done this. She had somehow enchanted this sterling character, this shadowy enigma who had appeared out of nowhere. She had turned him against Marcus. He had not miscalculated. He had been cheated. He clung to one last desperate hope. The Obsidian Gala. It was the premier architectural event of the year, a celebration of the city's most ambitious projects. The centerpiece of the evening was meant to be the unveiling of the final, fully rendered model of the Obsidian Tower. It was supposed to be his coronation. He still had his invitation. He still had his suit. He would go. He would get on that stage in front of everyone who mattered in this city, and he would reclaim his narrative. He would expose Ilara as a vindictive, unstable woman. He would paint Sterling as a corporate predator. He would remind them all who he was. He would perform his power one last time, believing with the unshakable faith of the truly deluded that the performance was the same as the reality. He did not understand that Julian Sterling did not operate in the world of performance. He operated in the world of ownership, and the stage Marcus planned to storm already belonged to him. The night of the Obsidian Gala was a tableau of glittering artifice. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. Champagne flowed in endless golden streams, and the air hummed with the carefully modulated conversations of the city's elite. It was a room built on power, influence, and the unspoken agreements that held their world together. Ilara stood in a quiet alcove, a glass of water untouched in her hand. She wore an emerald gown, a color Julian's mother had insisted would honor the strength in her eyes. The dress was simple, elegant, and felt like armor. For weeks, she had worked tirelessly from a private design studio Julian had set up for her at the estate. She had reclaimed her project, poring over blueprints, correcting the subtle, ruinous changes Marcus had made, restoring the integrity of her original vision. She was no longer a ghost in her own life. She was the architect. Julian found her there. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a stark figure of black and white in the sea of color. He moved through the crowd not by pushing, but by the crowd seeming to part organically to let him pass. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a low anchor in the swirling noise. "No," she answered honestly. "But I will be." He nodded, accepting her answer. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her face. The bruise had long since faded, but a new light had replaced it, a quiet confidence she was still growing into. "He is here," Julian said, not as a warning, but as a simple statement of fact. Alara's stomach tightened. She scanned the room and found him easily. Marcus was holding court near the bar, a little too loud, his smile a little too wide. He was a man playing the part of someone who was winning, but the desperation clung to him like cheap cologne. He looked thinner, his eyes carrying a frantic, hunted look that all the bravado in the world could not hide. "He looks small," she murmured, surprised by the realization. Stripped of the power he had stolen from her and the wealth he had built on her talent, he was just a man. A petty, cruel, and ultimately insignificant man. "All tyrants are when their thrones are removed," Julian observed quietly. The time came for the main presentation. The president of the Architectural Guild took the stage, his voice booming through the sound system. He spoke of innovation, of the future of the city's skyline, and then he began the introduction for the Obsidian Tower. "A project of this magnitude requires a singular vision," the man said, reading from a card. "And tonight, we are honored to have the visionary behind it, the man who has pushed this project forward from its inception, Mr. Marcus Thorne." A smattering of confused applause rippled through the room. Marcus strode toward the stage, his face alight with manic triumph. This was his moment. He had won. He reached the podium, beaming out at the crowd, ready to deliver the speech that would restore his universe. But before he could speak, Julian Sterling stepped out from the wings of the stage. He moved to a second microphone that had been set up, his composure a chilling counterpoint to Marcus's frantic energy. "There seems to be a slight error in the program," Julian said, his calm voice cutting through the anticipation. The room fell silent. "Mr. Thorne is no longer associated with the Obsidian Tower project." Marcus's smile froze on his face. He stared at Julian, his expression a mixture of disbelief and pure hatred. "What is this? What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Correcting the record?" Julian replied smoothly. He turned his attention to the audience. "The Obsidian Tower was acquired by Sterling Conglomerates last month. We have spent the subsequent weeks restoring the project to its original brilliant specifications. The vision for this tower was never Mr. Thorne's. He was merely its first and most damaging obstacle." Gasps and murmurs swept through the hall. Marcus's face was turning a blotchy red. "You're lying! This is my project! She's poisoned you against me!" He pointed a trembling finger at Alara, who stood watching from the side, her heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm. Julian ignored him completely. "The true architect of the Obsidian Tower is a woman whose talent has been overlooked for far too long, a woman whose work you have all admired under a different name, but whose genius you will now know. It is my distinct honor to introduce the lead architect and chief designer of the Obsidian Tower, Miss Alara Vance." He turned and extended a hand toward her. It was like a dam breaking. The truth, her truth, flooded the room. For a decade she had been invisible, her contributions erased, her name a secret. Now, in front of everyone who mattered, he was giving it back to her. He was not just clearing her name. He was carving it into the history of the city. She walked toward the stage, her steps even and sure. She felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on her, but the only ones that mattered were Julian's. They were filled with a quiet, profound respect. It was the look of a man who saw her, completely and correctly, as his equal. As she reached the podium, Marcus finally snapped. The last vestige of his control shattered. "You bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You owe me! Everything you are, you owe to me! I made you!" He lunged for her, his face a mask of primal rage. He never reached her. Mr. Park materialized on the stage, moving with that same impossible speed and quiet efficiency. He intercepted Marcus's lunge, his arm catching him across the chest like a steel bar. The force of the impact sent Marcus stumbling backward, where 2 other security guards, dressed in the same dark suits, were suddenly present to catch him. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus shrieked, struggling wildly. "Do you know who I am?" "We do," Julian said, his voice laced with ice. He held up his phone, the screen glowing. On it was a live feed of Marcus's remaining stock portfolio. As they watched, the numbers began to plummet, cascading toward zero in a waterfall of red. As of 90 seconds ago, your former company filed for bankruptcy. Your assets have been seized to cover your debts to my associates. The car you drove here tonight has been repossessed. You are not a visionary, Mr. Thorne. You are a trespasser with an overdue bill. You own nothing, not even the suit on your back. The finality of it was absolute. It was not just ruin. It was erasure. Marcus Thorne stared at the phone, his mind finally, irrevocably breaking. The fight went out of him. His body went limp, and a terrible, ragged sob tore from his throat. He dropped to his knees, his head in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. The powerful developer, the arrogant tyrant, was gone. All that was left was a broken, pathetic man kneeling in the ruins of his own lies. The security guards lifted him to his feet and began to drag him from the stage. His sobs echoed through the cavernous, silent hall, a funeral dirge for a life that had been a fiction. Alara watched him go, but she felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, no satisfaction. It was like watching a storm pass, a thing of sound and fury that was, in the end, just weather. It had no power over her anymore. She turned to the audience, to the sea of stunned faces. She stepped up to the microphone, her hands steady. She looked at Julian, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. And then, in her own voice, under her own name, she began to speak about the building she had designed. Later that night, they stood on the terrace of the grand hall, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city. A cool breeze whispered past, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and life. The party was still going on inside, but out here there was a profound and welcome peace. Ilara leaned against the stone balustrade, the emerald of her dress a slash of vibrant color against the dark stone. She felt a strange lightness, as if a physical weight she had been carrying for a decade had finally been lifted from her shoulders. It was the feeling of a story reaching its proper end. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. She turned to look at Julian, who stood a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets. "For everything. For seeing me. I only stated the facts, Miss Vance," he replied, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "The facts were always on your side." "They simply needed a more forceful advocate. Please," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "After all this, I think you can call me Alara." He turned to face her, and the city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "Alara," he said, testing the name on his tongue. It sounded right. "In that case, you must call me Julian." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled not with unspoken tension but with shared understanding. This was new territory for her. Her relationship with Marcus had been a transaction, an endless negotiation of power and control. What she felt with Julian was something entirely different. It was not the fiery chaos of passion. It was the deep, quiet resonance of recognition. It was the feeling of safety, not as a gift, but as a fundamental state of being. "My mother adores you," he said, changing the subject slightly. "She has already started planning a new wing for the house, a design studio for you. She says the light on the east side of the lake is better." Alara laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. "She is a formidable woman." "She gets that from my grandmother," he said, his expression softening. "They believe in building things that last, families, homes, legacies." He took a step closer, closing some of the distance between them. He did not reach for her, did not try to touch her. He simply moved into her space, a quiet invitation. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Julian," she said, her voice firm. It was a promise and a statement of fact. She was not a guest in his life, seeking temporary shelter. She was a partner, an equal. She was staying. "I have never known things to be anything but complicated," he replied, his voice a low murmur. "I find I prefer it that way. It clarifies what is important." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the CEO, past the quiet sovereign, past the dangerous man in the tailored suit. She saw the man his mother knew, the man who understood the value of things that last. And in his eyes, she saw a reflection of herself, a survivor, a builder, a person who had walked through fire and was ready to see what grew from the ashes. He finally reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was light, respectful, and yet it sent a jolt of warmth through her that was more powerful than any of Marcus's empty passions. It was a gesture of care, a gesture of seeing. "The Obsidian Tower will be the tallest building in the city," he said quietly, his fingers lingering for a moment near her temple. "Your building." She looked out at the city, at the endless constellation of lights, at the space where her tower would one day stand, a testament to resilience, a monument to the truth. It was not an ending. It was a beginning. A new foundation, built not on lies and stolen glory, but on the solid ground of mutual respect, shared strength, and the quiet, unshakable promise of a new day. A future she would design, for herself, with him.